Hey, sports fans, Larry Eder socialing the distance. Today we have a treat. We have Geoff Wightman, who is a global commentator on sports as well as coach of his son, Jake Wightman, a very fine 1,500 meter and 800 meter runner. I loved his 800 at the European team, Geoff. Great to see you, my friend.
Yes, you too. It's been a long time, Larry. Nice to catch up with you.
I think last time I saw your shiny countenance in the same place may have been at a event, you know?
Yes, it would have been early last year. It will have been the indoors in Boston over a year ago.
Yes. When did the announcing stop for you? Did it stop right away with the pandemic being announced, or how did it work for you?
So I think it was perceived in many parts of the world as a Chinese problem. So I can remember having an intense conversation at that Boston meeting with Paul Swangard, and he was saying, well, the world indoors is only 500 kilometers from Wuhan. I think that's going to be called off. And we agreed, but we weren't thinking that events in the States and in Europe were in any jeopardy at that point, which was end of January, early February. And then as it became a more serious issue and the infection count and the death count was going up, it was pretty clear that all sport was going to struggle. So the last event I did live was the start of the Big Half in London. I think Mo Farah won that on like 1st of March last year. And then I probably traveled the following weekend with Jake to do a race in a road relay in Scotland. And then within a matter of days of that, things closed down very quickly. So the US UK became a no-fly zone in about March the 17th. I think Jake got on, and Harvey Dixon, who I was coaching at the time, got on one of the last flights to Phoenix, and then ended up having to stay in the States for about 3 months, just until almost their esters expired. So it was, and then the next event I announced at was probably the London Marathon elite field only on October the 4th. So it was more than 6 months, nearly 7.
What was that event like?
Great. It was great. I mean, London Marathon does everything well.
Sure.
So they'd maintained a bubble. It started in the dark. So the women's elite race was in the dark and in the rain. My recollection of that is how well Sarah Hall ran. We were kind of following that from quite early on because it was clear she was judging it very well. So that was exciting. The men's race was exciting for other reasons because obviously Kipchoge lost for the first time ever almost. But it was a great event. It was you're probably only talking about 30 or 40 athletes, but it was just nice to have athletics back.
I want to talk about the nature of how you do commentating because I think you have a very relaxed demeanor. You get excited about the events. You give us the amount of information that we need and some things we're not expecting. Do you prepare some of the unusual things beforehand? Or is it because are you using the wiliness of a certain Mark Butler to provide you with various esoterica?
Well, Mark, for those that don't know, is the World Athletics statistician and also has done work for the BBC over the years. So I've been very lucky to have what are called Butler notes for most of the major events that I've done for about the last 10 or 15 years. So Mark is very thorough. He'll give you everything you need and a little bit more besides, family pets, family connections, unusual employment occupations, claims to fame. But I think sometimes there's always humor in sport. There's always things that don't quite go to plan, false starts or funny maneuvers. And you can't really rehearse those. You just got to be alive to the possibility of something unusual happening or exciting happening.
BBC television is almost always live. And I remember an Ian Stewart story about when Istanbayeva was going to break the world record. And it was right 30 seconds after they went off live. And he just got, the producer, whoever it was, totally lost it on him. Like he could plan something like that. What's the challenges of doing things completely live?
Well, I think we've got better at things like that. So it's in a Grand Prix meeting, it's very rare for something spectacular to happen after the televised live window. But it can happen.
Mhm.
If you think about the nature of pole vault, you can
Sure.
have a field of 10 or 12 competitors and an opening height that you think will whittle it down. But what you can't guarantee is delays while other events are going on, the number of people that will require 3 goes, 3 attempts to clear. So a competition that you may have thought was going to be 30 volts could end up being 50 volts, and your world record breaker only entering the competition at volt number 48. So it's hard to sort of box it in completely, but on the whole, we're pretty good at highlighting the things that need to be highlighted. But I can imagine Ian going
Oh yeah,
spare or something like that. It was
yeah, it was one of those stories because I was following them around in '06 and '07, just getting over there for the first time and seeing how there was a producer infield, a producer with BBC, a producer for Global, and I'm trying to figure out how do we do things better in the U.S. And the broadcasts that I would see from the UK were always a little more entertaining.
yeah.
The reporters, the TV announcers had done their job for such a long time in the U.S. We had certain Olympic former gold medalists who would do no work before they come on TV, and you would want to take a nap or have a sack lunch. We've got a good group now, but
Yeah.
it's taken a while to build to that. In the UK, who's the most popular woman in athletics?
Do you mean as a competitor or as a commentator?
Is a competitor.
I would say, I mean, the two people that I had showcase at the Gateshead Diamond League on the British only press conference was Dina Laura Muir. Laura's been around slightly longer. She came onto the scene in sort of 2013, 2014. Dina Asher-Smith was still carrying kit for other athletes at the London 2012 Olympics. So you forget how young she is.
Yeah.
I think she's only 24, 25 now. She was third in the British Sports Personality of the Year a couple of years ago behind Lewis Hamilton. I would say Dina is probably our biggest female star right now in track and field in Britain.
Both Laura and Dina, they should be commended because I think they take virtually any question that you give them or the media gives them, they answer it with to the best they can. I mean, I watched Dina manage some American reporters in Doha by using the term cheeky with them, and they had to look it up in a dictionary. But it was well done. When you're preparing, and I've watched you interview, I enjoy your interviews. So let me start it this way. How much work goes into preparing for a 3-hour live track meet on television? How much work are you putting in terms of research? Is it a couple days? Is it a week?
No, so I mean, I follow the sport on a daily basis. I've lived and breathed
Sure.
it since I was 12 years old. So on the whole, for a televised meeting, whether it's a road race or a track session at a championship or a 2 or 3 hour Grand Prix, I try and limit myself to 2 to 3 hours. I'm lucky that I get stats sometimes prepared by Mark Butler or Andrew Sabo at World Athletics. But even if I have to prepare it myself, it's a bit like an exam. If you did a lot of time in the research, you have a tendency to want to blurt it all out rather than call what you see is very great. If you've invested 10 hours in prep, you want to get it all out there like in an exam. And I think that's dangerous. So I still do 2 or 3 hours. So I'm not caught out, but I think that's there in reserve. Some of the stuff is calling the races and the jumps and throws as you see them.
What is your philosophy about announcing track meets in terms of what should a proper commentator do?
So the role is slightly changed over the years. When people like Gary Hill and others started doing it in the 70s, 80s, it was really a minimal information function. So it was to explain who the lineup was and to announce the result. There was no commentary during the race because that was deemed to be influencing the outcome a little bit. There was no music. There was no screen or graphics or things like that. It was fairly dry, and I think a lot of sports were at that time. But we've seen team sports radically improve their event presentation, and I think as athletics has evolved that whole event presentation function at every level, our role is to inform, connect the athletes and the spectators so that they both get the best out of each other, and to entertain, I think. So the music and everything else should all be part of an experience that people enjoy and want to come back and enjoy again, and feel fans rather than just spectators. And I think if we don't do that well, then those people will go to ice hockey and basketball and football and cricket and enjoy those experiences more. So it's had to evolve, but essentially the cornerstones are to inform, to connect, and to entertain.
Geoff, I was asking a little bit about the process where you're doing interviews of athletes. Part of it's remote, part of it you have the reporters there. What type of challenge does that put in front of you?
Yeah, we've had a couple of those. At this indoor season, the indoor tour event ended up being in New York that would otherwise have been Boston. That was 100% remote. I thought the athletes did remarkably well there because they were essentially sitting in a completely empty room, barring me and them, and somebody controlling the camera, and a bank of TV reporters from home asking individual questions. We had a sort of hybrid version of that at the Gateshead Diamond League event, the Muller Grand Prix, a couple of weeks ago, where we had probably 6 or 8 journalists in the room and probably 10 or 15 who were filing questions on an iPad separately, and so that was for the international run athletes and also for the British runners, and I think it worked okay.
We posted the transcript of the what I call 20 questions with Sha'Carri Richardson, who I think is a pistol anyway. But it was one of the funniest interchanges I've seen in a long time, because the reporter, obviously a member of the British media who had not met her before, tried to ask the same question about 5 times, just with a little different twist. And it was mostly about Justin Gatlin and about Dennis Mitchell, both athletes who have had their run-ins with drug positives, and both who the younger members of the media in the U.S. Culture would call them drug cheats, and virtually all of the British media do the same thing. And it happens, in many times. I recall in 2015, of the 37 questions Mo was asked in Birmingham, 35 were on drugs. And when Cathal Dennehy and I raised our hands and asked about him running a 1,500 and a 3,000 before the world champs, he looked at Ricky, and Ricky said, "Mo, those are track questions." And we laughed about it, but it's part of the nature. It's part of the nature of things. How do you manage that when you're doing a press conference that's remote as well as live? Because you're trying to get an audience to get into it. You know that they get kind of fed up at a certain point about doping questions, and you're really trying to give information, and the athletes get fed up too. So you're in a tough place. So how do you make those decisions?
Yeah, and I think this is also a very timely discussion in view of what's happened with Naomi Osaka, where she's withdrawn from the French Open tennis completely, stressed and anxious. She had no expertise in, and it creating a headline that just didn't do her justice. So it is a timely thing to be discussing. In Gateshead, we have about half an hour for a press conference, and it's being filmed and streamed live by World Athletics. So that's roughly the time available. I always take my introductory remarks to try and bring out the character of the athletes, for them to talk about their prospects, to create the rivalries that everybody wants, because essentially the purpose of that day before press conference is to attract interest in the events, the characters, and the contest, to do your bit for athletics. Then we had questions from the floor in the room, and you've got those people credit for having turned up the day before to ask them. And then we had about 20 odd filed on the iPad that were coming up as the press conference was in train. Now, they were quite a mixture. I made sure as best I could, I asked at least one from every newspaper that had lodged them. The one that I got criticised for was not asking Dina about Shaqiri's coach, Dennis Mitchell, but it had been asked on the Thursday. We'd had negative headlines from that. It had been asked of Shaqiri herself. I don't see how Dina was qualified to comment on it. She might not know either of them that well, certainly not the coach, and it may not be any of her business. But also, we're there to promote the return of the sport. It was the first that we had expectations. Everybody was excited at its return. And my judgment was, I'd asked plenty of other questions. There was questions about Black Lives Matter and things like that. And it wasn't the time or place to ask a question about Dennis Mitchell. And I think, there was a criticism for that, but somebody was sharpening their pencil, wanting to write another negative headline about athletics.
Yeah.
I'm very anti-drug. There are people in the sport that I detest because they've served drugs bans, but there's a time and a place for these things. And the day before the first televised meeting in Britain under a new governance in Britain with star athletes, the first appearance in Britain of our new world champion. When Dwayne Chambers first got banned in 2003, 2004, it was a huge story. And for some reason, that kept being the story as far as sports is concerned. It was how long's he banned? When is he coming back? Will he be allowed to race again? Is he going to American football? Is he going to try other rugby league, other sports? Everything was Chambers, and it was always negative. It was always drugs, cheats in athletics. And the result there was not only did nobody else in that decade get a chance to establish themselves as a performer and a good news story in athletics, but there was no story that was allowed onto the sports page unless it was drugs related. And we never broke clear of that. In the end, all of those correspondents lost their jobs because there was nothing to write in athletics that was allowed column inches unless it was drugs cheating. From that, there are good news stories around athletics, and the day before a televised meeting should be good news stories.
Yeah, no, I concur. I have the same feeling at the. I like to talk to athletes at the medal award ceremonies and post that, and because a lot of times it gives me a chance to let the athlete talk about their career, because most of them it's the only time they're going to get a medal, And I recall having Joe Duplantis, Sam Kendricks, and Piotr Lysick in 19 in Doha, and it was the end of the night. My son's recording the interview, and people started asking Alberto Salazar questions, and Sam just about lost it. He's a pretty mellow guy. And Piotr looks over and says, "Larry, would you ask us a pole vault question?" And so I asked him a pole vault question, and there's, like you said, there's time for it. And the athletes will be more than generous with their time, but it's also give them the time to celebrate the sport. And we really have to build heroes. We've got a generation of athletes right now. I mean, in the UK, you've got Dina. I can't get enough of Laura. They're quite articulate.
Well, I got the gist of what you were saying there, Larry, and you're right. In Laura Muir and Dina Asher-Smith in particular, we've got world-beating athletes. They're highly educated. One's a vet, 5 years in veterinary school, and a view on all sorts of women's and minority issues, and they express themselves well. And I think it's wrong when there's great characters, there's great contests, there's world-class athletics being undertaken by decent characters to always drag it back to the lowest common denominator of trying to get a negative drug story. There is a time and a place for that, and our British media perhaps needs to call that a little bit more fairly for the sport. You can't always be doing knocking pieces.
In the last year or so, BBC cut down the number of track meets they were covering on television. Now with the pandemic having come up, and people are sports mad right now, do you see BBC covering more athletics events?
Well, the BBC has just signed up for the whole of the Diamond League. The effect of that is they've lumped in the British meetings with it, so there's no additional fee to British athletics for their hosting of events, but there is a lot of athletics on the television, and that will include the Tokyo Olympic Games. So the BBC has always been a natural partner for athletics and a long-term ally for the sport. The issue I think that athletics has is that it's lots of people's second favorite sport. You know, they'll watch it, they'll be interested, especially at championships where they get the whole tension of national representation, heats, eliminations. But I think as a sport, this isn't really a BBC issue. We need to present that year-round Diamond League format in a little bit more of a tense way. I don't know whether that's team formats, national vests, some sort of narrative to the various Diamond League events, but we need to tap into the fever that there will be around the Olympic Games.
Okay, this question is something you were not prepared for. I'm going to become the world's wealthiest man for 2 days, and I'm taking over athletics, and I'm making you the director of communications. Give me 3 things you would do to get those people who see track and field as their second favorite sport to see it in a different light.
So I would take your whole budget and I would invest it in a pilot of a team-based format, and I would call the teams New York Jets, Chelsea, Barcelona, Bayern Munich. So tap into those fan bases where there's year-round support for known quantities, and I would get each of those to have a franchise. I would link a shoe brand to each of them. I would have a draft where they can pick their key players against values and points quotas, and then put that on prime time, pay for the airtime, and make it like a cup final. Because I think there's something in there about fandom and connecting with a team in a way that we don't have outside of major championships. And you can have, you know, that's a way that you can have 5 Kenyans doing an 800 meters, and it matters because they're for different teams, and one of them is going to be your team. And so you really are invested in how that guy does, because the team places, the big prize money all ride on those individual contributions. Okay.
There was the European team champs this weekend, and your son, Jake, ran the 800, ran very well. Always enjoy watching him. I remember the first time I heard you announce Jake running when you were doing announcing. What is that like, announcing your son in a major meeting?
I've kind of been announcing Jake's races since he was at school. So I did his school sports day because his mother is the head of PE at a couple of places he's been at. So it's, in a way, it's nothing unusual. I've been doing it since he was 12. The meetings have just got bigger and the consequences of it greater. But the reality of it is you've got to be professional. I often get to do the 1500 and 800 for men and women. I love those events. They always are dramatic, you know, especially at championship level. And if I ever showed any impartiality or said anything that wasn't right for all the competitors, I wouldn't get to do them again. And I'd hate that. So I have to stay professional. And sometimes, especially when he was younger, if he was in a big race like the Emsley Carmile and he finished down the field, I didn't even notice it when I was commentating because the lead round and the time. So there's a kind of thing that you get into that Jake may not impact on. So I called his bronze medal at the Commonwealth Games, and that was probably as good as it's got so far. We'll have to see how this summer looks, but I'll still do it for everybody's benefit, not just his. You know, I want those races to be great for the spectators and everybody that lines up, especially if it's in a final, that they all enjoy it. So I don't think I'd get caught out on being impartial or favoritism or anything of that kind, because I can't.
How many athletes do you coach at this time?
I coach 4. Ian Crow-Wright has had a bit of injury, but he's shaping up as a 5,000 meter runner. Ben Waterman and Michael Wilson. Michael's got through to the British Championships. He's run a 1:49.5. Ben is doing a master's at Oxford, and his father's not very well, so he's got a lot on his plate. But I enjoy coaching those 4 at the moment.
What's the biggest challenge in coaching your son?
I think that the father-son relationship would get in the way of the coach-athlete relationship. It's evolved. I'm probably less dictatorial than I would have been when he was in his teens, because he's experienced an awful lot of things, ups and downs. So we kind of know what works, and he knows in particular what works. Half the battle is staying clear of injury. So there's a sort of team around it: a sprints coach, a strength and conditioning coach, a physio, a physiologist, an agent. So that I'm just part of it. But it seems to have evolved okay. We'll have to see how.
Do you get nervous before his races?
I do. I think my heart rate is probably elevated more during his races than any others. But sometimes men's 1500 comes on 3.5 hours into a 4-hour session. So there's so much going on that you're vaguely aware that it's on its way, and he's probably in warm up now, and he's probably in final call room. And then when they're lining up, I think, God, this is it. But you've still got to deliver the same output for the event, for the spectators, for all of the competitors. So it's a consideration, but it's not something that I find overwhelming.
When my son started working with me, when he was about 18, he decided to call me Larry with all the business stuff. And I remember we went into a meeting with a big marketing guy, and we're discussing things, and he goes, Larry, we should add this in. And the guy was a buddy of mine too, and he took him aside and he said, why do you call your dad Larry in business? And he said, I can't criticize my dad. He says, I can criticize Larry. And we joke about it. My father loved that. How do you deal with that? Because I've had a conversation with Jake a couple of times, and I just said, hey, you guys have got to disagree about workouts once in a while. How do you do that? And he said, well, a couple of times I've lost my cool. And he said, I got to go back and kind of apologize, but we've kind of figured it out. Is it coach and advisor now that he's at the age as he is? Is it still, do you coach? Because I've watched I'm fascinated with the relationship of a coach athlete and how it evolves during a career. And a lot of times they become friends, they trust each other. And I think that's when sometimes the things really flourish. And I'm just fascinated with, you guys seem to work well together. And how do you guys do it?
So Jake has been mentored over the years by Seb Coe. And that's partly because they both went to Loughborough, they both did the same events, and we've been lucky. And I've known Seb for many years. And Susan taught his daughter. She was his first PE teacher. But
wow.
Peter, it was only dad and son. So they used to demarcate track time and personal lifetime. Jake and I have never had to do that. He's never called me by my first name because it's not as strictly separated as that. But I think what has happened, and we haven't really fallen out that much over the years about anything. He's a fairly easygoing character. I think if I coached his twin brother or his sister or his mum, we would fall out more because, he's lined up for a world final and run a Scottish record. I don't know what that feels like. Only he knows how that feels and how you get to that point. And a lot of it's about building confidence, following routines that we know that work, adding a little bit, but only a little bit each year, doing the injury prevention stuff. And I think you kind of get judged on your record. And he's been to the last 5 major championships and done all right. So it's a reasonably comfortable routine that we're in, albeit not one where you can rest on your laurels. We have to evolve it each year, but it's probably more to his credit than mine.
We're in an Olympic cycle with a pandemic. So how do you prepare, Jake, knowing that you've got these unique medical situation, unique global health situation? Or are the preparations that you do normally, you're watching, making sure he doesn't get sick, you're watching that he pays attention to, getting wet clothes off, stuff like that. Were there any new parameters that you had to put in place as you were preparing for Tokyo?
Yeah, I mean, in the past, I think we've taken it for granted that you can take off to places like South Africa in January, Flagstaff in November and April, book them well in advance and know that you're going to be able to go and people are going to be able to come with you and the airlines are going to be fine. Almost everything that we've put in place as a plan A over the last year hasn't happened. We've had to go to different venues. We've been to Dubai twice, which I would never have thought about. You have to. We were cancelled in South Africa at a week's notice. So all of those things have meant that we've had to have plan B, C, D, and E. You don't travel that comfortably these days. Everything takes longer at airports. You've got to carry exemption letters, parallel flow tests, PCR tests, socially distance on the plane, be prepared to take a long time on arrival, only have separate rooms, nobody rooms together. These things were a shock to begin with, but they are becoming the new normal, and they are the price that you pay for the health and wellness of the whole of society, not just sport. Sport has had to do its bit, and it's been inconvenient, but some of the alternatives are far worse. So I guess there's practices that we've evolved on hand gels and masks and distancing that we may never drop even when things get better because they've just become so ingrained.
If I was going to ask you which track meet that you announced showcased your talents best, do you have a favorite meet, one that you're most proud of?
I was very proud of London 2012. I mean, it seems a long time ago now, but that was an absolute dream for somebody. I think 18 months before, I was about 4 seats away from being involved in that meeting. I wasn't announcing other than occasionally in Diamond League. So to have been awarded English announcer and ended up being lead English announcer was just still bowls me over to think of that. But that's a disciplined format, the Olympic Games. The sort of things that I like best are things like the Adidas Boost Boston Games that Mark Wetmore puts on. I missed it this year because there were no spectators and I was at Gateshead, but I love the proximity of fans and athletes and the intensity of the racing, but the way that presents the sport in a new way. Those are some of the meetings that I enjoy, the ones that really innovate and take us to new audiences.
Do you so next year, so this year we've got an Olympics. It'll be different. We'll leave it at that. That's the word we can use right now. Next year we've got the Commonwealth Game, the European Champs, and the World Championships in Eugene. Do you think the meets next year take on greater significance because of what we've gone through the last couple of years?
Yes, and also for us, you can't underestimate the impact of a home Commonwealth Games. It will be amazing. It's going to be slightly scaled back. I mean, the athletics program is only 5 days, but the last time, Glasgow 2014 and Manchester 2002 were epic games. I think that it'll be a big challenge for any British athlete to try and do Worlds, Commonwealth, and Europeans over a 7-week span between qualifying and the last of those. So I don't think there'll be as much doubling. I think people will try and do all 3 championships, but it will be amazing. I mean, don't forget there's some indoors on top of that as well. Isn't there a world indoors due as well? So yes. The whole knock-on effect of the pandemic means that we should get a real feast of athletics next year. But there could be casualties in that because the London Diamond League has been shunted this year because it was the only event due in that football stadium, or what's a football stadium in the winter. There may not be room in the calendar to schedule it there in the window that's available in July next year. So that needs thinking through, because that is probably the best athletic stadium in the world when it's full and athletics is taking place. But it was built as an athletic stadium and reconfigured for football. And people forget it was not the other way around. It isn't a football stadium that accommodates athletics. It's an athletic stadium that accommodates football.
What is the? We're down to our final three questions. Um, the Of all the stadiums you've announced in, what's your favorite stadium to announce in?
London Stadium. I mean,
Okay.
there was the first anniversary games there in 2013.
Yeah, I was there.
We had a Friday night and a Saturday, and I think it was that year or possibly the following year that I managed to get everybody to hit the flash bulbs on their cameras when I introduced the B for Bolt in lane
Yeah.
6, and they all did it, and you can see it on YouTube. It was just,
Yeah,
we were still on 60, 70,000 people in there then, even after it was reconfigured. So I hear good things about Eugene. I think it's going to be a great stadium, and it's probably going to be the best dedicated athletic stadium in the world. But when we get the track in at London Stadium, there's nowhere quite like that, I don't think.
I've been to, this would have been my 10th Summer Olympics, and I sit up in the very top row. I like to see everything, and I like just to have my space, and I can, shout out if I need to. And when I was sitting in London, the guy that was doing the final show would come over and have a cigarette next to me. And he would be telling me he worked with Lady Gaga, and he's telling me all these things they're doing. And it was so much fun, to see that, because that's when I do my writing, because I'm watching the events. I want to watch the events as much as, you do. And then I try to write afterwards and try to, and you're doing the social media and stuff too. But I thought London was glorious. I always loved the Letzi Grand in Zurich. I got to go to the Europeans for the first time. And I went to the Commonwealth Games in 14, and Stuart and I pulled something. He told a bunch of Scottish riders that I was behind the move to bring the U.S. back into the Commonwealth Games. And I worked these guys for 2 days. And they were preparing a story too. And we couldn't do that to them. But have you ever had anybody try to pull one over on you or do a goof at a meet? Give you an athlete's, I had never seen Eddie Murphy's movie Coming to America. And in 2014, the Nike crew, Ben Cesar, Paul Mosier, and John Capriati, set me up to interview the 4x1 from Zamunda, because they had been kept out of the Commonwealth Games. And I am. I'm writing it down on a tablet and going, God, I get to talk to some young kids. It took a year and a half, and I had forgotten about it. I bring it up to my son, and he goes, Dad, you haven't watched anything but Beverly Hills Cop. Welcome to Coming into America. And my girlfriend finally showed it to me about a month ago. And I'm going, oh man, have I blown it? So has anybody ever goofed with you over stuff like that? Is that ever happened?
We get, I work a lot with Catherine Merry, and sometimes, and it's great fun. There's a lot of banter there. And also with Ewan Thomas. And in Doha, we had a pre-show there where it's just to sort of talk about the session that's coming up and reprise a few things.
Those are fun.
Yeah. And that's game for smuggling in bogus names and things like that. And the guy that produces it, Ian, he's game for some odd captions as well that come in. So yeah, I think pre-show and post-show, there's stuff like that. I don't know. We'd be pretty brave if we put too much in during a meet, because it's not about us. It's about what's happening on the track and in the field. So you have to make the best of that.
Do British fans, they seem, well, I know in London in 2017 and 2012, it was just glorious to be with a crowd that totally loves. And that's what you will, I think, see. And I just went to Hayward a couple weeks ago, and I sent a note to Ed Harry, and I said, I love the old Hayward field. I said, the new field is not what I expected, but it is a sanctuary to sport, and people are going to love it. And that's what I think, Phil Knight and crew and his family were trying to do. There's controversy there, but it's a glorious, like you said, single sport place. And but where I'm getting too long-winded, do British fans send you notes and tell you when they thought you've done a good job, but more importantly, if they think you haven't given somebody some love, do you get a very polite note? Hey, why haven't you said this about Dina, or why haven't you talked about Gemma more? I mean, is that how they communicate with
I
you?
think it's the sort of playing field for that stuff is social media. So if you say something wrong or say something unusual, it's usually Twitter where it pops up, and that's where you find out. Because I mean, we're all of us Marmite, you know, people either love it or hate it. You're not going to satisfy all of the people all the time. But so you know, Cindy O'Philly has got married and her name is now Cindy December. So I cracked this gag about what's the answer to the question, when is Christmas? Cindy December. And that got a good laugh. But then on social media, they were, oh, we started that one. Here's the evidence. You know, this was on this feed 6 months ago. But I'm in the stadium and I'm enjoying it. Well, I'm in the stadium and I'm hating it. You know, they're not giving enough attention to the pole vault. That's where you tend to get that. So you can't please all the people all the time. You can only do your best, and that's for the sport, for those watching it, and especially for those taking part in it.
Yeah, I get editorial comments from the Backstreet Boys. There's always a comment from the guys, and I love them. And then I've got this one gentleman in the U.S. I have a preponderance of misspelling 2 or 3 American athletes' names, and he very gently and not there's not a mean bone in his body, but it's just Larry, and I just retweet it and thank him. You know, but thank you so much, Geoff, for today. I mean, I really appreciate your time. When's the next meet you're announcing?
So on Friday, I'm off to Hengelo, which is
Awesome.
Continental Tour Gold. Jake's running there, and that was cancelled last year, so it's the first time in 2 years. But the start lists look fantastic. I enjoy working with Global and all of that team. So it's really nice to have events like that to look forward to. And after that, it's British Trials. So June's going to be a great month.
Yeah, I like Hengelo. It's I love it that they only have dark and Pilsner, and it's Grolsch. There's no Heineken allowed in town, which I try to explain that to people over here. And, you know, we live in Wisconsin part-time, and the cows, or the bulls in Hengelo have the strangest, they're like Belgian Longhorns, you know? And so to me, that's the kind of stuff that I enjoy. Well, Geoff, enjoy the meet. I'll be watching it from over here. Thank you again, my friend. And so ends the Socialing the Distance. We had Geoff Wightman. He is a global announcer, also co-host on Jake Wightman and 3 other fine athletes. And he talked to us today about global media and the challenges and whatever questions I could remember. So, Geoff, thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you very much,
Stay
Larry.
safe. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Well, hello, sports fans. Larry Eder, RunBlogRun. This is Socialing the Distance, your favorite program. This week we featured Geoff Wightman. Geoff is a globally known announcer. You may have heard him the 2012 London Olympics or 2017 London World Championships and many of the Diamond League meets and other meets around the world. His thoughtful voice and his wry sense of humor keep meets lively and moving along. He has also coached the 4 athletes, among them Jake Wightman, his son, a bronze medalist at the Commonwealth Games in the 800 meters, one of the top 1,500 meter readers on Team GBR, and the Scottish record holder at 1,500 meters. So pretty cool. But Geoff and I spoke today about the nature of presentation and his philosophy on commentating. And he explained that in the olden golden days, you know, with Gary Hill from Track and Field News and folks, they gave stats, they gave splits, but that was it. They didn't want to be seen as aiding one of the athletes who was competing, and never should a correspondent or a announcer show their preference for an athlete. I also spoke about that because as Geoff is coach to his son, he announced him in various major meets, including London 2017. And he explained that he has to be very even keel and he can't say something more about his son than he does about any other athlete, or he would never be returning to the dais, or to the stands in announcing. So those things are really key. Research. It takes about 2 hours to prepare himself for that day for a meeting. He says if you do longer, you're going to want to use the information, and perhaps you're going to put too much information into a meet. There's an art and science into putting things together for a track and field meet. You want to give them splits. You want to give them some information. Luckily, Geoff relies on World Athletics as well as Mark Butler. Mark is a well-known and iconic statistician, but he also knows the names of someone's dogs, how many Boston Terriers have had, those kind of things. Things that kind of make it kind of fun when you're in a 25 lap, 10,000 meter race and you're not trying to yawn. But Geoff doesn't do that. He keeps us in touch with what's going on in the meet, and he helps weave the stories around these athletes. In terms of weaving stories, we were talking about interviews, and now during the pandemic, the interviews are even more complicated because they're partly remote and partly live. For example, at Gateshead just a week ago, there were three reporters, media members at the event, actually at the event live. Everybody else was remote. Geoff had to juggle questions about drug cheats with questions to Dina, with questions to Sha'Carri, with questions to Laura, and he has to make some editorial decisions. He felt that the drug cheat things had been brought up at the other press conferences, and he had kind of covered it. It was already covered ground. And he wasn't real sure what Dina Asher-Smith could lead to add to the discussion about Justin Gatlin and Dennis Mitchell. So he declined to ask those questions, which I think is perfectly within his right. But he also said something else. He talked about the time of Dwayne Chambers back in 2003, when every presser in Britain, if Dwayne showed up, it was all about drugs. And Geoff said one of the things that happened is for that decade, there really was no British athlete who made their name because they couldn't get past the drug stories. And what happened as a result of the drug stories, a lot of athletics beat writers went away. Even though the editors would only write stories about drugs with track and field, that was their thing. No one wanted to read about it. It's a little different now. I think you got to call people out for cheating and doing those kind of things. I don't think you need to do it 30 times during a press conference. I thought Sha'Carri handled herself quite well, and she is a rather colorful person, and she has a lot to say. She speaks out a lot about mental illness, which I think is very cool as well. So hats off to athletes who are willing to talk about things, and Geoff gives them a platform. But one of the things I've enjoyed about Geoff is he's got a sense of humor. He's knowledgeable. His coaching background, I think, comes out in his announcing. And there are times when I just like to hear, him giving a description to a race, and then I write about it afterwards. Because when I'm in the stadium, sitting up in the top row, trying to watch everything and seeing what's going on and taking notes and sending tweets out and stuff like that, sometimes I miss some major happenings in a race. And that's why I try to watch the events all the way through. I remember in 2014-15, I was with Christian Taylor watching him and Pedro Pachardo competing. I think it was in Lausanne, Atletismo meet. And I missed the first time Christian went over 18 meters. And I apologized to him afterwards because that was one of the things he really wanted to do. And I was following him all around Europe, and we were writing about the triple and the pole vault and all the field events people don't write about, because there's a lot of people out there who dig those events. And I think that's one of the things that, if I was going to give Geoff Wightman a pat on the back, he talks about all the events with equal enthusiasm, and that's really important. As an announcer and as a coach, he adds to our sport. He does a lot of good things. So thank you, Geoff Wightman. This is Larry Eder, RunBlogRun. This is the epilogue to Socialing the Distance. Today we feature Geoff Wightman, who is a global announcer for track and field, coach to 4 athletes, including his son, Jake Wightman, Scottish record holder at 1,500 meters, bronze medalist in the Commonwealth Games. Geoff, thank you. And we can hear him announcing this weekend at the FBK meeting in Hangzhou. Larry Eder signing off. If you like Run Blog Run, like us at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you love us, subscribe on YouTube. Watch our videos, pass them around. We have 2,500 videos and audios since 2010. We have we have 369 videos alone in 2020, and add on another 25 or 30 audio podcasts, and I think you'll see our drift. I think we have something for everybody. So check it out. Larry Eder, Run Blog Run. Stay safe.